Sound check. All right, once again, we are doing our annual review of the stuff things that have been occurring over the past 525,600 minutes. Frequency podcast. Are we picking up the sound normally?
Stuff things performance this year has been great.
All right, we can try this one quickly. Wait, Patrick, say a thing.
Oh, right, I was supposed to do that.
All right, sound check, N.
Hi, and welcome to Podkeep Our Land, a story where I can't do any of the P's in the sentence.
I'm Erin Rennie.
I have problems with L's and W's.
Let's do this show! Hello and welcome to Podkeep Our Land. It's what?
Robert Arthur Williams
would have listened to. We are a show about Canadian politics, politicians, parliaments, and policies. I'm your host, Erin Rennie.
I'm Matthew Naylor.
And I'm Patrick Meehan.
It's January 9th, 2018, and we're back from our holiday break. We missed you. I hope you missed us. We've used the time off to do a little bit of reflecting about how far we've come in 2017. We have 16 episodes under our belt, and a few that we haven't published. And we've been thinking about where we want to take the show. And so we want to express our appreciation to all the listeners who have gotten in touch to let us know what you like about the show and what you don't like. We want a little bit more information, so we've put together a listener survey. And we would love it if you would take 5 to 7 minutes to fill that out online. You can find the link on our Facebook page or on our Twitter feed. And please do take the time to fill that survey out. It will give us a lot of helpful information about what you like to hear and what you would like to hear differently. Okay, so we've got a great show for you today. We're going to be, first of all, the Ontario minimum wage is going up and some military procurement buzz in Ottawa these days. Then we're going to be talking about some issues around politician conduct and an interesting survey that the Canadian press conducted around the experience of sexual harassment by female MPs. And then we'll also be talking about Senator Wynne Beyak being kicked out of the Conservative caucus. And then finally, we'll end with a check-in on some BC issues regarding the PrEP pill, the ALR review, and an update on the BC Liberal race. So why don't we dive right in and take on our first topic. The unemployment rate, you guys, is the lowest it has been in the last 40 years. Pretty amazing.
This is a good thing because people are working.
Yeah.
It's pretty incredible. The unemployment rate is about 5% these days, which is very, very low, especially considering that a lot of us are still feeling the effects of the 2009 recession. So, good news. Do you think the federal government or the provincial governments can take any credit for this?
Yes, obviously they can take all the credit for this because governments are alone responsible for how many people are working and how many people have jobs and exactly what the economy is doing. Economies are not affected at all by the vagaries of global markets, supply, demand, and those kind of economic forces. It's exclusively, the whims of John Horgan and Justin Trudeau that decide whether people have jobs.
Paul Wells did have a take on this a couple of months ago where he posted in one of his pieces in Maclean's that there's a certain amount of economic activity coming out of the Trudeau government that they've been generating, that there's a decent amount of sign that they've been bringing about some things through some targeted investments and stuff. And so they do have some reason to brag, I think, but obviously like the fact that that a huge swath of British Columbians are building houses because we have an out of control market is probably not necessarily something that the government ever engineered or planned.
So what do you attribute this lowering of the unemployment rate?
Well, I think, while I was being flipped before, I hope that was clear, there is some stock to be put in the stimulus that the federal government has been pumping into the economy. Yeah. There is a circular flow argument to be made here. Get a little economic-y, not that I have a ton of background there, but the more money you put into an economy, the more it is able to slosh around and end up in people's pockets through jobs.
Okay, well let's move on to our next topic then. Ontario's minimum wage just went up on January 1st. A pretty big boost. Went from $11.60 an hour to $14.
And it's going up to 15 sometime shortly after that too, isn't it?
I think January 1st, 2019. Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty radical increase. And it's getting a lot of people excited, for good or for ill. Minimum wage earners for sure, but also economists are eager to see what this big bump will mean for Ontario's economy. It's a little bit of an opportunity for economists to test what happens to an economy when you increase the minimum wage. wage. There's a lot of conflicting theories around what happens when you increase a minimum wage. And this increase being so big and all of a sudden gives them a really interesting test.
Yeah, I've definitely been seeing it all over like economist Twitter, as it's so called. But the funny thing for me is that all of the sort of well-established economists that I follow are talking about how there really isn't substantial evidence that there's real damage from minimum wage hikes. That there are damages, because anytime you take a government action, there are winners and losers. But that like the damage, the general consensus seems to be that this is well within the bounds of what is a rational decision. That the existing evidence says that this is a reasonable, okay decision that is unlikely to have significant job losses.
There have been reports that suggest that this will cause job losses, or predictions that suggest that this will cause job losses. On some of these things, I think that we just don't understand how economies work sometimes, and are just sort of throwing pasta at the wall and seeing if it sticks.
Well, yeah, but I think that it was something like 60,000 jobs lost was on the cover of the newspaper as an estimate from one think tank. But even if that's true, there's something like 1 million Ontarians that work on minimum wage, and so 60,000 is actually kind of a relatively small percentage of that. And the other ones are going to get a boost in income by like $1 and something an hour.
Yeah, I have actually from the Bank of Canada, which is I think the think
that
tank.
That was the think tank I was referring to.
Yeah,
the notoriously right-wing biased Bank of Canada.
While the net impact on labor income would be positive, employment would fall by 60,000, a number that lies in the lower part of the range obtained from an accounting exercise. Consumption would decline because higher inflation would elicit a slight interest rate increase, which would more than offset the higher labor income. So, like, to me, it's just like, and this lever goes up and this lever goes down, and hopefully the plane continues flying through the sky. $15 is it seems like it's getting close to a minimum livable wage.
Yeah, I think that's the David Moscrop went off on Twitter on a tirade today about how in reality we're not talking about how many jobs, we shouldn't be talking about how many jobs are lost. We should be talking about holistically the idea that like we have people that are suffering on minimum wage. Is that okay? And if not, is the damage to the economy from making them not suffer okay? And we never seem to look at it from that secondary lens.
I think the calculations for what a living wage is in Canada is something around $21. So
it depends on your community you're in. It's $21 in Metro Vancouver. Lots of British Columbia cities have around $18 or $19 from what I've seen. I haven't seen numbers outside of BC though.
Right. So if we're talking about livable wage, this new minimum wage, even by 2019, isn't going to get there.
No.
But it's getting closer. And if that's what you value, trying to get people closer to a livable wage, then a good move.
This is, of course, like looking at this particular economic change in isolation and not in the context of an economy that is creating quite a few jobs. So while those jobs may get eliminated, they might be offset almost immediately by other jobs that are created.
Right. All the extra money that's being circulated in the economy because people have more spend.
Mm-hmm. It actually kind of reminds me of what happened during the HST harmonization, where some employers decided to hire more people and some decided to pass those savings on to customers and some decided to put more money in their pockets. It also reminds me that some people are dickheads because they have decided to claw back some employers, including a large franchisee of the Tim Hortons Corporation, have decided to send a very jerky letter to their employees saying we're clawing back your paid breaks and your benefits because Kathleen Wynne's government is terrible and hates you. And that is frankly just reprehensible.
And that's the Rorschach test that comes out in this situation is, on Facebook there's people posting, of course they would do this. That's exactly what happens when you raise the minimum wage. And there's people posting, what awful, terrible people. And it's this Rorschach test about this that isn't, we don't have good conversations about how the people on low incomes live lives in Canada. We just have weird, well, how many jobs is this going to cost and how bad is this going to hit the economy conversations?
So what about the political angle? The Ontario legislature is up for election in June. This is usually the kind of move that a premier would make early in a mandate, not at the very tail end of a mandate. What do you think Kathleen Wynne's political angle is here?
Well, I think early in the mandate, the $15 an hour movement, the calls for that weren't nearly as strong as they have grown now. And it's also a very nice present to people as, they're going to see a pretty substantial increase in their paycheck. And because, and this doesn't make a ton of sense sense to me, who has been politically committed for, say, 15 years or so now. Most people make the decision on who to vote for between 7 days and 7 seconds before they mark their ballot paper. So, like...
Well, and it's an embattled government, right? The Kathleen Wynne government is sitting, like, at ridiculously low points in the polls. They're looking like they're going to get shellacked pretty bad, and so it's not surprising that they're throwing policy out the window to try to bail out the good ship Liberal, right?
The Ontario Liberals have been in such a situation before, though, and...
Oh, yeah, and their ability to clutch victory from the jaws of defeat is legendary. Or, potentially it's more the Conservatives' ability to clutch defeat.
And certainly Andrea Horwath has...
Existed.
Helped. Yes, she has existed.
She has existed for several years as a leader of the party.
She's the NDP leader, by the way.
The entire and it's not even her. It's the NDP in Ontario has been a spent force since the 90s.
So like, does this mean? Do you think that she is feeling threatened by the left? Because this is not something that she's going to gain conservative voters over. Is she trying to take NDP voters?
I don't necessarily agree with that, because I think there are a lot of conservative voters or people who are theoretically accessible to the Conservative Party of Ontario or the Progressive Conservatives that are working class, who are the kind of people who in BC might have been that kind of 10-second soak cred or working in industry, who have people or know people who are working minimum wage jobs, and so this substantial boost in their incomes, and when people start making that assessment, am I better or worse off than I was 4 years ago? It may drive those people to vote for the Liberals, and beyond that, there is a pretty substantial danger that a beleaguered government, beleaguered in battle, whatever you want to call them, it might just not show up. If people don't have any reason to vote for Kathleen Wynne to keep her in power, that's how she's going to lose the election. Voter turnout in provincial elections is 50% on a rough average. If people show up, they will determine the outcome, and if people are happy and grateful and want to continue this minimum wage increase, then that could win her the election.
Okay, let's turn now to our next topic, military procurement. Patrick, do you want to give us an update on both the national shipbuilding strategy and the fighter plane procurement?
Yeah, okay, so in short, the national shipbuilding strategy, which we talked about in a much, much earlier episode, has been ongoing since 2010, I believe, and what it was the idea was it's going to replace a lot of our surface vessels. We built a lot of our surface vessels sort of in the 90s and the 80s, and they were all planned out during the Cold War, and then we never bothered building anything after that. And so all of our ships, and we call them surface vessels because they're not submarines, all of our ships in the Navy are old and falling apart, is sort of what it comes down to. And so this whole idea was to renew and refurbish all of them all in one massive plan. And it's been fraught with problems all along. Everyone has sort of seen it being a problem all along. I believe the first Arctic patrol vessel launched in December, actually, of this year, and they're coming along, but everything else keeps getting delayed, and the contracts keep getting delayed, and the costs keep ballooning. And so in December, Michael Byers, who's a UBC professor of political science and focuses most of his research on Arctic sovereignty, he put out a major report that basically said, all of this is costing way too much. Also, you're not building icebreakers, and we may not need some of the other ships. And all of this is sort of fairly well known, has been sort of rehashed for about the last 7 years, but it did make some pretty big news again in December as sort of this ongoing question of these costs continue. In terms of, do you want to talk about that and then do the airplanes?
Yeah, let's.
Is there anything to add about this?
Is there anything debate on?
Oh, I think no.
In terms of the airplanes, our CF-18s, same story. Our fighter aircraft, they're getting significantly older, and obviously we've been having a lot of political differences between the Trudeau government and Boeing as they continue to sue each other. And so what's happened is that the Canadian government said they're not going to buy from Boeing, and so they've decided to go out and buy these old CF-18s from the Australian Air Force that are being decommissioned. They're going to use these CF-18s as trainer planes, so they're going to take the Canadian CF-18s that have been substantially upgraded above and beyond what the Australians have right now. They're going to put those into operational service because they're still good operationally for a long time, and that'll extend the life of the fleet by using these Aussie planes as training planes, essentially. The idea here is it's a stopgap, and it'll push us another 10 years off before we need to really not make a decision, but it pushes the time at which we cease having fighter planes by a number more years to hopefully give the government a time to either either decide to decide what they're going to purchase as a replacement.
So, like, at some point, there is going to be some decision between, like, the F-35s, which remain
Which generally people think we're going to buy.
Yeah, which is going to be just sort of annoying based on the
There are other options out there. The Super Hornets.
in the Eurofighter
In the Eurofighter Typhoon, there are options. The thing is that to your average person, if you were to show them pictures of all three planes and say which one would you pick, you wouldn't be able to guess because they all look like fighter planes. And they all have relatively comparable capabilities, although the F-35 has some other capabilities that's also significantly more pricey. And
has one engine? Is that the...
So the one engine, two engine thing is such a politically fraught discourse that has no reason to be politically fraught.
Okay.
The concern is that the F-35 may not be able to operate in the Arctic because it only has one engine. If the engine goes kaputski, you're in the drink.
Why is crashing in the Arctic more dangerous than crashing into anywhere else?
Because you can't get picked up afterwards.
Oh, okay. I see.
That whole dying on the ice thing. So because you can't get picked up afterwards, you need a plane in theory that has more robustness. So a second engine in theory is more robust. The odds of a lot of consensus is that the odds of one plane going on you is low enough that you don't have to worry about it. But there is that concern. Like there's a whole pile of like very specific gearhead kind of arguments as to which one to go with, and I don't particularly care which one we go with, but we are going to have to pick something soon. And that's something that this government has sort of seen a lack of ability to do with large purchases is actually decide.
One of the things I found really interesting about this this article was how, okay, so we're buying the secondhand fighter jets from Australia until we can figure out the procurement piece to get the new plane. Because the United States has imposed a 300% tariff on Canadian Bombardier planes, we can't go ahead and buy these Boeing fighter jets that we originally intended to buy.
And so, Boeing's also suing the Canadian government, it should be noted too,
right.
for dumping these Bombardier things.
Right. So one of the things the article was saying was that the government has changed the procurement criteria, stating that one of the criteria you must meet in order to bid for this contract is that you have to show that you're not imposing unfair or problematic economic consequences on the Canadian economy. And it's a really interesting tactic, I think, that they're taking, in that they're trying to show, like, we still want Boeing to bid on this contract. We still want what you're selling, but we want you to change your behavior over here when it comes to our Bombardier planes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in the age of Trump and in the age of all of this uncertainty, who knows where this is going to go? I don't know if the United States government will continue to retaliate, or if Boeing will continue to dig in, or if our government will continue to dig in, at which point we'll all just stare at each other across a ways for a while. But at some point soon, and we're talking like 3 to 4 years at most, the Liberal government is going to have to, assuming Liberal government gets reelected, the Liberal government will have to make a decision and buy some planes.
When Jean Chrétien was elected in 1993, the first thing that he did was tear up the contract to buy Cormorant helicopters. Like, the very first thing.
We're in the process of replacing the Sea King.
Yes, so we then used the Sea King helicopters for another 1,000 years. And, like, why are we doing military procurement in a way that is so subject to the capricious partisanship of the House of Commons? Like, why can we not...
It's not just that, though. It's also the capriciousness of the needs, of the mission creep of military command. Military command adds all sorts of additional extraneous, unnecessary needs because everyone has their own thing they want. And so no one at no stage of military procurement is able to come up with a simple, we need this thing, let's get it. And since the Cold War, the United States and Canada both have been absolutely incompetent at military procurement.
Right, we stopped fighting Russia. Oh, wait.
Well, yeah.
Well, I think part of the answer to your question, Matthew, is that everybody else is doing it also. Mm-hmm. It's really, like, Canada could unilaterally go and say, we have this completely objective, rational process for bidding on our military stuff, and we're going to stick to it. But it would put us at a disadvantage. And I think a lot of people, both from the military and from the public, would get very concerned very quickly, because all the other countries do the same thing. They all make their military procurement part of their geopolitical strategy and their internal political strategy.
Yes, and it's that internal political strategy that makes it, like, very frustrating. thing, because I think like we probably could have done with the cormorants and not used the Sea Kings forever, and we probably, like, if we end up going with the F-35s, yeah, maybe they maintain the rightness of the choice throughout the entire thing, and Stephen Harper's defense ministry was right all along. Is there some way to insulate military procurement against, like, capricious internal partisanship by, like, saying we have bringing the shadow minister in?
I think the short answer is no.
No? Okay. Well,
It would be really nice. Like, as long as I can remember, we've been talking about
billions and billions of dollars nice. Like, it's
Yeah.
not a small cost.
But also remember, like, a lot of the problem for this comes out of the fact that in 1989, when the Eastern Bloc fell, and then in 1991 when the Russian government fell, for 10 years we just didn't think we needed a military.
All right, the end of history.
Yeah, and so for 10 years we like all replacement programs were scrapped, all long-term planning was scrapped, and then 2001 hits around, and not even just because of 9/11, but because of just age of things, we started to come into this end of life for everything. But there was no one to really worry about, so we kept using things well past their end of life, and now everything is old, and it's like that moment where, like, not just one thing in your car needs replacing, everything does, and now you're sitting there trying to figure out, do I get a new car, do I keep replacing things, and, like, for even just the average person, that's a very difficult conversation, and that's the position we're in. It's basically everything needs replacing, and it's really hard to decide to do that with the huge budgets with the huge costs that you're looking at.
I have one final question on this. Why is a fighter jet from the 1990s considered old, but we're still fighting fires locally with planes that were built for World War II?
The Martin...
Why? Why?
Because the Martin Mars water bomber is just like an iconic thing that people want to see in the air, and it doesn't do any different.
So the Martin Mars bomber is a bad idea, which is the water bomber that I think you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's because the guy who owns it is really good at PR.
Yeah, but the other thing is that the fighter planes aren't actually from the fighter planes are designed in the early 80s. They went into production in the 80s. They were, I think, the last one came off the assembly line in the 80s. So they're all as old as I am, and I mean, I think I'm pretty young and spry, but I guess airplanes flying at Mach 2 may not be able to hold up that long in terms of the steel.
Yeah, soon they will shake themselves apart. Yeah.
Okay. They're put through more strenuous activity, is what you're saying.
Than me, at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also PR. Okay, well, let's take a radical shift in topics and turn now to the issue of sexual harassment among politicians and other people who work at Parliament Hill. So a really interesting study in the last few weeks out of the Canadian press. They did a little survey amongst female MPs around the issue of sexual harassment, and 58% of respondents stated that they had experienced sexual misconduct while on the job as a parliamentarian, and 47% of respondents said they were subject to inappropriate comments on social media. And it's not just staffers, of course. This is also, it's not just politicians, of course, it's also their staff, reporters.
But the survey was just MPs, wasn't it?
The survey was just MPs, yes.
Which is what I think is even scarier.
Right.
Because the MPs are more likely to speak up and be willing to speak up. And the staffers are obviously going to fear for their jobs, fear for all sorts of things, right? Yeah, that's the part that really got me, was the idea that if 58% of members of Parliament, who are in theory like equals to these people, are feeling this and are avoiding social activities because of it, and avoiding this, the other thing because of it, how are the staffers, the junior staffers, the 20-year-olds and the 22-year-olds, the interns and whatnot, how are they facing it?
Also, like, only 40-something% were subject to inappropriate comments on social media? That seems insanely low to me, because, like, every time I've worked for any politician, there have been inappropriate comments immediately. Like,
Yes.
and all the time.
Yeah, I should say this wasn't a scientific survey of any any sense. It was voluntary and not a huge sample size, but just a bit of a pulse read on what's happening Parliament Hill in 2017.
I think it's staggering. And I think everyone knows it too, right? Those of us that have been around politics long enough know people that, you say, maybe that MP shouldn't be around the younger women, and those comments that are no longer acceptable, and never should have been acceptable. But the fact that this is this sort of like unspoken knowledge thing, and I'm sure that Matthew, you would be able to name some MPs, and I'm sure I would be able to name MPs that, we've heard questionable things about their character.
Oh, I've lived some situations like that.
Actually, no, and now that I think about, anyways. But the thing is that the fact that is the culture there and has been the culture there for so long is so troubling to me, and has been for a number of years now, is the fact that this was this thing that everyone just sort of accepted. And I'm so thankful thankful that hopefully we're getting to a point where space is being created and safety is being felt enough that people are willing to come forward, and hopefully we can just keep doing whatever we can to make that happen.
A couple of years ago, it was announced that a couple Liberal MPs would not be running under the Liberal banner again because of actions that they took towards their female colleagues.
That was the NDP MP that went to Justin Trudeau to name the two MPs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know if it was the same MP in both cases, but it was I think it is admirable that Trudeau brought the hammer down.
Absolutely. And what I didn't think was admirable was that the news media, the news cycle was about whether this was a political attack on those two MPs by an NDP MP. And not this wasn't the Liberals, this wasn't the NDP spinning this. This was the news cycle became about, well, was she doing this to get rid of some MPs from the other party? And in fact, I've even heard in year roundups this year, journalists at various outlets talk about that and talk about how much the situation has changed since then. Is that situation, and now that you've had all of these situations in 2017, have changed the way journalists approach that. And I think if that were to happen again, you wouldn't see them approach it that way. And I think that's really positive, albeit small steps.
So are you saying that it's taken us so long to sort of shed some light and take action on sexual harassment in politics because of a fear that it would be perceived as political machinations, that you're trying to launch a political attack against somebody rather than just accusing them of something that they may have done?
Well, like 6 months ago, we just sort of like habitually didn't believe women when they said that this was happening, and so I think that was probably also playing into it a little bit.
I mean, you worked in Victoria, and
yeah.
I don't want you asked to talk about any of your experience or anything, but like, what was it? What, from a woman's perspective, walking the halls of Victoria, because we both worked in Victoria in the legislature. What does that feel like that maybe we don't understand? If you don't mind my asking.
Yeah. I think a lot of what's going on is power, and sexual harassment is a lot about power. Who has power in our society? Who gets to take up space in the public realm?
Right.
And politics is all about power, and it's about getting popularity and having experience and being the loudest, most convincing, and those things can get very blurred. And it's also a profession, if you want to think about being a politician as a profession, where your professional life and the social life get very blurred as well. And so what's going on while you're working during the day carries on when you go to the social
right,
receptions.
because it's like a constant social life. It's,
right.
Everything cycles.
Yeah. So I think people's understandings around what behavior is appropriate when and gets very confused. And
I mean, you even see that in more mundane ways of like people just drinking too heavily at the events and being known for that or what have you.
There is free booze at
all the
like,
time.
Yeah. And so like
sure. So people get stupid.
And it can be a dangerous situation, and it can be a situation in which people like are away from home and they think that they have free reign to do this kind of stuff because like they're in another city even though it's their job to be there. But also like some of it is just that like men don't respect the power and authority of women, and like this goes all the way to the top. Women Supreme Court justices in the United States are interrupted by male lawyers 3 times more than their male counterparts on the court, which to me is insane. You don't interrupt a Supreme Court justice, but like the patriarchy exists.
Right. Yeah, the patriarchy exists, and I'm sort of enlisting reasons, but definitely not excuses. Like you shouldn't sexually harass people anywhere during any time of the day, during social events or work events. But we haven't actually had that attitude as a society ever, and it's only now that we're really starting to take action against like a lot of the rape culture that exists in bar culture. So federal government has developed an optional online training program for MPs who maybe don't understand how sexual harassment works.
Oh, it's optional.
Yeah, so now they can learn these things in case they haven't come across, respectful workplace training before in their professional lives. And so that's the latest. Do you think that's enough? Do you think it's gonna make a difference?
I think MPs are not trained enough in general. Like I think our legislators don't have enough knowledge about what they can do and what they can't do. And so I think the training for MPs should be much more rigorous, and it should include respectful workplace training. It should also like include some more more legislative theory, because especially since we don't have like all lawyers in the House of Commons anymore, there's a lot we can do to improve MP training.
But at a human scale, I think we absolutely need to not have things like that be optional. I'm blown away that this is an optional training for, how to be a basic human in the workplace. That's not optional in my workplace. Like, anti-harassment training is not optional in my workplace. You can't just opt out of it. It's a basic component. I hope it's becoming a basic component in more and more workplaces. And it blows me away that it's not a basic component of being an MLA or an MP.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is the paradigm shift that needs to take place. Being a public official, as a politician or working in politics, is certainly a privilege, but it's also labor. It's work, and you deserve to have the same protections as any other worker. And I'm not just talking about respectful workplace stuff, but also other things that tend to keep women and other minorities out of politics, like access to maternal benefits, for example.
Yeah.
So hoping that we see some change. We've seen a little bit of change already, and hope going in the right direction. I want to shift gears now to another case of a politician in Ottawa who has been, what many people have said, abusing their position of power over the last year. This is Senator Wynne Beyak. She has recently been kicked out of Conservative caucus for refusing to remove letters from her constituents, which she put on her Senate website, which contain very, very racist and stereotyping type language about Canada's Indigenous. And this is the senator who early last year, without being asked to, stood up during a committee meeting and started talking about the benefits of the residential school system. And since then, she's just kind of doubled down on this stance.
Stephen Harper just appointed the best senators.
It's actually extraordinarily painful to hear this kind of stuff from me, because as someone who has a very nice personal life and has been the beneficiary of some extraordinary privileges, but also has Indigenous heritage, I have this family history that I don't have a ton of connection to because of effectively the residential school system. Because of actually our episode on Canada 150, I started doing a lot more looking into my family history and talking with family members who have somewhat more connection through genealogical research into our Indigenous heritage. And, effectively there's been a lot of coming across of statements like, your great-grandmother was in a residential school. They were exactly what everyone says. And to hear someone say that all the people who were, even most of the people who were running these schools were well-intentioned or had the best interests of people at heart is, number one, wrong. It wasn't the best intentions. It was a program to stamp out, to kill the Indian in the child was the explicit aim of these programs. Pretty
incredible that that this senator would not only hold those views, but would repeat them, even though so many people have come out and tried to, educate her to the opposite. And she's already experienced sanctions when she was interim leader. Rona Ambrose took her off all her committee appointments as a result of these kinds of statements. But that hasn't stopped her, and it's not going to stop her because there's no way of removing her from the Senate entirely.
Well, the Senate has now launched an investigation into her conduct, and there's things that they can do that are limited because of the nature of the Senate. But the Senate is launching an investigation, and we might see something in terms of restricting her ability to speak in the Red Chamber, restricting her access to staff, restricting her ability to essentially have a voice in the Senate.
The restricting her ability to speak thing in the Senate, as someone who cares about Parliament and the sort of representative nature of it, strikes me as a little odd. But I say get rid of all her staff and her tech support and her website. Yeah. Learn how to code HTML if you want to be racist on the internet, Senator. Man, it's awful.
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating that this person is being financially supported indefinitely and is allowed to continue to propagate their ideas in a very public way.
Yeah, it is people's prerogative to be racist, but it is not their right to have that financed by the taxpayer.
Do you think that it's time for us to start putting in some kinds of more official consequences for this kind of behavior by our elected officials?
She did did get thrown out of Conservative caucus, and, good on Andrew Scheer for doing the absolute minimum he can do.
But also the maximum he can do.
Also true, but it took him kicking and screaming to get there after she had constantly and repeatedly said things along the exact same lines. This was not a bozo interruption, as it were. This is a consistent and unrepentant racist. And it took, the third strike before he finally kicked her out of caucus? It should have been the first.
Fair enough, I suppose. Every party is going to have their own procedures for dealing with caucus members who have views of a sort. And the objectionable thing for me isn't that it took him so long. Sure, there had to be an investigation, and I don't agree with the idea of throwing people out if they make one poorly informed statement. If she just didn't know, fine.
Yeah.
But she was also unwilling to learn, because she made a statement that said, I know everything I need to know. You don't need to tell me. I don't need to learn. And then she was and also, I'm going to give a megaphone to racism.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty concerning. I hope we see a little bit more action from whoever has the right to make those decisions in Ottawa.
Well, basically, the Senate should be able to expel its own members.
They may try. Mm-hmm. It's the newly independent Senate, so they may try. We'll see.
Should we move on to our last topic? BC check-in.
This one's happier.
Okay. I think I'd like to start with check-in on the BC Liberal race. Matthew, do you want to give us the latest?
If you followed my advice and were someone who cared about centre-right politics in British Columbia and signed up to join the BC Liberal Party, number one, my condolences for your endless phone calls that you will now be receiving from every camp asking you who you're going to vote for. That will all stop when you tell them, so do tell them. I got a call at the beginning of the recording, and I didn't know who it was from. I just yelled some name into the phone and hung up, and hopefully they don't call again. But that will continue until the race concludes at the beginning of February. It's coming down to the wire now. Also, you have to register to vote. So if you are a BC Liberal Party member, that does not automatically qualify you to get your ballot. You need to go to the BC Liberal website and register. So please do that. Otherwise, you will not get your PIN to vote in the election.
Yeah, that's not too surprising. The NDP, I think, did something fairly similar. I think it has something to do with mailing outs and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it prevents the whole instant Liberals kind of
or multiple ballots accidentally getting to you because they've got you on 3 different databases, which happened in the NDP race to a couple of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why do 55 people live at this 3-bedroom household?
Because you've been signed up by 55 different people.
Mm-hmm. Or others. But yeah.
So what's your sense of the race? Is it? I mean, to me, it still looks wide open between 4 candidates.
I think 2 clear frontrunners have emerged. I think the race is down to between Stone and Wilkinson. I could be entirely wrong there.
I feel like Diane Watts is still in there just for name recognition, and just she seems to have a constituency, but I can't place it.
Well, I can place it. It's in Surrey, but
yes, yes.
I think the reason I'm skeptical of that is the BC Liberal race is WOMOV, weighted 1 member, 1 vote. So we are trying to have a geographically restricted candidate's support base won't win them the leadership.
Yeah, no, we've covered that before, right? The idea that you need to have sort of representation across the province, including on the island. It's why Andrew Wilkinson has been making campaign platform announcements in Prince George all the time. Mm-hmm. So I think he's trying to carve that away from Todd Stone, is what it looks like.
And it's why BC Liberal leadership winner Christy Clark campaigned very strongly in places like Vancouver East and Vancouver Mount Pleasant.
And why candidates have even been to Vancouver Island.
Mm-hmm. It's remarkable.
It's a good system.
I think it's a beneficial one, but I don't think that Diane Watts has particularly covered herself in glory at the debates.
No.
In fact, I think she's actually been kind of abysmal.
Yep.
And so I don't really think that she's going to win.
Okay, I can see that. I can see Todd Stone and Wilkinson being the battle of the Titans.
The dark horse candidate, I think, is Michael Lee, and then Mike DeYoung was finance minister and has a broad base of support across the province. But you don't make friends being finance minister. So
do BC Liberals, do you think, feel like they're happy with the race? race so far, or are they pretty meh? Because I know, like, you look at, if Todd Stone gets in, he hasn't put forward a lot of platform points, which is exactly what Andrew Scheer and to a lesser extent Jagmeet did. And I don't think that either of their campaign, either the membership of those parties were very excited at the end of the race. Well, Jagmeet a bit, because he's got that sort of rock star quality.
Well, I mean, the BC Liberals are somewhat shell-shocked by not being in government and have noticed the membership signups being rather lower than the last time when they were choosing a premier. And so there is a little bit of, like, disappointment there. But yeah, I don't think that there's a ton of excitement in this race. I think we're just, chugging along, and a leader will emerge, and they will lead the opposition for the next 3 to 9 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I have to say
you.
that, like, I personally am not thrilled with the candidates, and none of them have done anything to particularly distinguish themselves. I have my top 3 at the moment, and I change who I am voting for as my top choice pretty much on a day-to-day basis, because all of them are hovering roughly at an even level, and none of them have done anything that really has won my, like, political heart.
Yeah, not hearing a lot of that sort of excitement or buzz out of this race.
Meh.
Do you think it
Meh.
will
Meh. Meh.
ramp up?
Meh. Meh. Meh.
For those that can't see, he's fist bumping the air right now.
Okay, Patrick, let's talk about the ALR.
Yeah, really quickly, the NDP have put out their 1 millionth commission to study a thing. They put out a commission to study ways to improve and strengthen the ALR, which is a thing near and dear to New Democrats' hearts. Is something that they created and they've been sort of fighting to hang on to ever since, whether there was somebody that was opposing it or not. They've been fighting to keep it. So what they've done is they've named a number of people to the commission. One of the people that they've named, most importantly, is Vicky Huntington. Vicky Huntington was the 2-time independent MLA for Delta, the Delta South area, and she really, I think it's a really interesting appointment because it shows that they're willing to really go outside of the realm of just sort of New Democratic people to go for this kind of a thing. There's a lot of people they could have named to that commission that would have, good bona fides, that longtime New Democrats, and by going for Vicky Huntington to be on the commission, I think it was a pretty good sign overall. I'm not sure what they're going to come out of it as, but I think it's another way to look at what this government is doing in terms of how it's appointing people.
So I think Vicky Huntington is a good choice for this. Delta South has a lot of urban agricultural land, and she has proven herself to be an independent voice in the legislature. I remember running a campaign, or helping run a campaign against her in 2009 and losing by 32 votes. So that was fun, and I had...
Tell us when your candidate can go door to door.
Yeah, it would. But, I like to think of my candidate that year as very deliberate and thoughtful and willing to engage with people. So willing to engage with people. Too willing to engage. Anyway, that campaign aside, Vicky Huntington had a voting record that was relatively aligned with the NDP for many of the years that she was in.
I don't know. I think she was much more of a green type person. She tended to stride between sort of center right, center left, stuff.
I suppose. Although,
she's certainly a small business, environmentalist type person.
But a federal conservative, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And she represented her riding, I think, relatively well.
Fair.
Yeah, good point.
Ladner and Tawasin are places that she knew, and she brought their voice to the legislature in spite of a fair amount of institutional opposition to independent MLAs having any power at all.
Yep, she was a very effective MLA. I was always respectful of her. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So she is doing this thing, and I think she's a good choice, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of changes the NDP might bring to it, especially if they will reverse the division of the ALR into 2 components, one of which, the northern and interior component, made it easier for development to occur within the ALR.
Okay. All right, I want to turn now to a story that we covered at a few episodes back around pharmaceutical coverage for all people, and especially with regards to PrEP.
Woo! I'm just gonna say that we did it! Clock Keep Our Land has done it. We have convinced the health ministry to do PrEP, which is the provision of a cocktail, a single pill cocktail to prevent HIV prophylactically. So good job to us and also to Minister Dix.
Clearly they were listening to our podcast. They also brought in as well coverage for an over-the-counter form of abortion medication, which is really fantastic to see. It's a really useful... I think somebody who clearly listens to our podcast in the ministry, and I think that was really good for them to bring in. They've also brought in a new form of birth control, a new form of abortion medication to cover over-the-counter, which is really great. It's a useful and valuable thing. And the other thing is that it's really cool to see these things happen, but also interesting when it's in the context of what we talked about before, is this idea of how you make decisions to cover what. And it's really hard to make these decisions because there's all sorts of medication. And this is a decision I think is right and good, and I kudos to Minister Dix for it.
Mm-hmm. Good job us, good job Health Ministry, and remember to take our survey.
Well, and good job to Government of Ontario also, who have decided to expand their universal pharmacare program to all adults up to the age of 25. So I think this is probably a direction we're going to see more and more provincial governments going, expanding their pharmacare programs to cover more people or drugs.
Yeah, one can only hope. And eventually I can get my dream of having dental coverage, because apparently that's different than the rest of the body. But yeah, it's really fascinating to see. I think, talking about Ontario raising minimum wage, talking about Ontario covering medication, BC expanding medication is this the rise of the social safety net? And I think we might be seeing it.
Why do we do all the good policies in election years? Oh, I see.
This isn't an election year in BC.
In Ontario it is.
Well, yes, but not in BC.
We don't necessarily know that. Daryl Plexus could get sick or something, so who knows? Anyway.
Okay. I'm gonna have to stop you there. That's all the time we have this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Do not forget to take our listener survey. You could be entered into a draw to win an opportunity to be interviewed on our show. So do take our listener survey. If you like this episode, please share it with all your friends.
And enemies.
And enemies, sure. Yeah. And be sure to follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and let us know what you thought of the show. We love your reviews. That really helps out a lot. So thanks again for listening. I'm Erin Rennie.
I'm Matthew Naylor.
And I'm Patrick Meehan.
We'll talk to you next time on Pod Keep Our Land.
So
I just know it.
I get to show James Carmen Sandiego, and I'm going to show him a little bit of the game show, like the classic Greg Lee, Lynn Thigpen thing.
You mean the show with the a cappella rock band?
Yes.
Acapella!
Rockapella.
Do-a-do-up, do-do-a-do-up, do-do-a-do-up, wow. Well, she sneaks around the world from Kiev to Carolina. She's a sticky-fingered filcher from Berlin down to Belize. She'll take you for a ride on the slow boat to China. Tell me where in the world is Carmen Sandiego. Oh, jeez.
Almost got that one.
Yeah, no, and
That's hard.
I have been able to hit it before, but it's like Carmen Sandiego. And then, so I get to show him a little bit of the original,
you planned this out.
Yeah, then a little bit of Where in Time is Carmen Sandiego, because that one is like weird and an iteration on the theme, and also some of the animated series, which I still fucking love.
What about the computer game?
Are you gonna see the movie?
There's a movie?
What?
There's a new movie coming out.
Oh yes, of course I'm going to see the movie. I did know that this was happening.
Yeah, it's got the star of Jane the Virgin.
Whoa, she's awesome.
I know, I love her. I always call her Jane Vuvuzuela. Yeah. Forget what her real name.
But like Carmen is the most developed as a character in the animated series, Where on Earth is Carmen Sandiego?
Yes, that is very true.
Which remains fucking great, and we've rewatched that thing anytime.
It's true. In the original series, she doesn't really have much character. She's just like bad.
Great fashion
steals
sense.
things, stylish.
I didn't know she was actually the villain for a while. I wasn't sure why we were chasing her.
Yeah.
I didn't really know what Interpol was when I was 7 playing the video game. The graphics didn't exactly give me a better idea.
Yeah, it's true.
It was most definitely Interpol in the original.
Oh, really?
Broderbund.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. There was like Interpol reports about her, and you were like chasing after her.
Like the thing about it is there appears to be this like incredibly well-resourced semi-terrorist organization organization, but like a very benign terrorist organization that only cares about stealing things for the sake of having them. Like
Really
the
knowledge,
the
actually,
hummingbirds and the Taj Mahal. So like maybe they're like benevolent, and then they are being combated by a detective agency that employs exclusively children or like young adults.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, who really is the villain?
Like, is it this weird child labor organization or this interesting research thing that doesn't care a lot about if the Elgin marbles were stolen because they're just going to steal them from Britain?
Well,
It's important to consider these things.
It is. It really makes you think about like the role of law enforcement as just kind of protecting capitalist elites and their property. Because we don't know what Carmen Sandiego plans to do with those.
I mean, she has declared herself as evil, but I think that might be a cover. Like, she's part of the
Sure.
Villains International League of Evil. But she's clearly, like, antagonized more evil people, and she used to be part of Acme, was one of their most promising detectives. So maybe she realized that the whole thing was bunk and decided to, I don't know, steal the Taj Mahal.
Yeah, and like maybe she's going to make it accessible for everybody, or maybe she's going to blow it up.
Well-
We just don't know.
She was putting them in Antarctica for a while.
Yeah, you know what?
Which actually might be just like foresight as Antarctica greens.
yes.
Or it might be for his preservation because it's cold.